For Pacifica Radio, I'm Christina Onnested. The United Nations is warning famine is imminent in northern Gaza, where 70% of the population is experiencing catastrophic hunger. Arif Hussein is the chief economist of the World Food Program.
In northern Gaza, famine is imminent, starting from now till May of this year. So it's a very short window to act. There are about 1.1 million people in catastrophic level of hunger. The situation is terrible all along. In the rest of the country, the situation is also really bad, and there is a risk of famine. Warning goes till July 2024.
His comments come days after a barge carrying some 200 tons of food from Cyprus reached Gaza Saturday. It was the first time in nearly 2 decades aid reached via the sea due to Israel's blockade of Gaza's coast. The Spanish vessel Open Arms brought the food supplied by World Central Kitchen with support from the United Arab Emirates. Alex Gonzalez reports.
It's the first time that anybody is going to be trying to arrive to the shores of Gaza in years because it's been a Navy blockade.
World Central Kitchen chef Jose Andres is leading distribution of 200 tons of food in Gaza this week, the first aid brought in by ship in a decade and a half. Andres is calling for a ceasefire and encouraging Israel to let more food in. I'm Alex Gonzalez for Pacifica Network and Public News Service.
The situation remains dire. The World Food Program estimates at least 300 trucks of food aid is needed each day to avoid the worst-case scenario. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz relayed a similar message in a meeting with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu Sunday. He also spoke against a Rafah ground invasion.
Take the ground offensive in Rafah. The military logic is one consideration, but there is a humanitarian logic as well. How should more than 1.5 million people be protected? Where should they go?
Netanyahu says he shared the same concerns about civilians in Gaza. This weekend, he also approved a plan for a ground invasion into Gaza's southernmost city, Rafah. Russia's President Vladimir Putin won re-election by a landslide, 87% of the vote, making him the longest leader of Russia since communist dictator Joseph Stalin. Presidential elections also took place in the 4 regions of Ukraine Russia annexed during its Ukraine invasion. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky blasted the elections, his comments translated by Al Jazeera.
These days, the Russian dictator is imitating another election. It is clear to everyone in the world that this figure, as has happened so often in history, is simply sick from power and is doing everything he can to rule forever. There is no evil he will not commit to prolong his personal power.
NATO head Jens Stoltenberg said Russia's elections were neither free nor fair. Putin warned a NATO conflict with Russia could result in World War III. This as NATO forces are holding military trainings in the countries of its newest members that border Russia, Finland, and Sweden, as well as Norway. Former U.S. President Donald Trump campaigned in Ohio over the weekend and repeated anti-immigrant rhetoric and defended the January 6th Capitol insurrectionists, some of whom have been imprisoned, calling them hostages. The blowback was swift. Alex Gonzalez reports.
Former President Donald Trump continues to use violent and authoritarian rhetoric. He warned of a, quote, bloodbath, unquote, if he's not reelected, and said undocumented immigrants are not people.
If you call them people, I don't know if you call them people. In some cases, they're not people, in my opinion.
A recent Gallup poll suggests immigration has replaced the economy and inflation as a top issue. Former Vice President Mike Pence says he won't endorse Trump despite being proud of what they accomplished.
Said during my presidential campaign, I made it clear that there were profound differences between me and President Trump on a range of issues, and not just our difference on my constitutional duties that I exercised on January the 6th.
Trump continues to praise January 6th rioters, some of whom chanted "Hang Mike Pence," when it became clear that the then vice president would certify Joe Biden's victory. California Democratic Congressman Robert Garcia says it's shameful that Trump is referring to January 6th insurrectionists as hostages. He's calling on Republicans to stand up to the former president.
Quite frankly, they're cowardly. They need to come out and take Donald Trump on for, in my opinion, the traitor that he is.
I'm Alex Gonzalez for Pacifica Network and Public News Service.
Vice President Kamala Harris spoke out against marijuana prohibition, calling it absurd and unfair. The federal classification of marijuana is more dangerous than fentanyl. She made the comments Friday at the White House in conversation with rapper Fat Joe.
Nobody should have to go to jail for smoking weed. And what we need to do is recognize that far too many people have been sent to jail for simple marijuana possession.
Regulators are considering downgrading marijuana's classification from a Schedule I drug that's considered having no medical use, but with a high potential for abuse, to a Schedule III drug, which is a tightly regulated drug. I'm Christina Onnested, reporting for Pacifica Radio.